That is true to an extent, but I'm going to be 65 years old, and I'm tired of losing. I'm tired of losing. How's that? There you go. First one of the new year. By the way, you can quote me on that. I'm sick of...
Tony Rizzo finally said it. Live on air, no filter. An F-bomb that shook the entire Browns universe. And the silence that followed? That told you everything you need to know. This isn't just about one rant. This is about a franchise that's been breaking quarterbacks for decades, and now Shedeur Sanders is caught in the exact same cycle. The question everyone's avoiding, is the outrage really about Shedeur's performance, or is it about a system that was never built to let him succeed in the first place? Let's be real. When a respected media voice like Tony Rizzo loses it on air, when he drops an expletive out of pure exhaustion, you know something deeper is happening. This wasn't a hot take for clicks. This was a man who's covered this team for years, finally admitting what every Browns fan has been too scared to say out loud. And what he said next, that's where it gets uncomfortable. I'm tired of losing. I'm sick of losing. 5 words. But those 5 words carry decades of frustration. And here's the thing. When you look at what's happening with Shedeur Sanders right now, you start to see a pattern. A pattern that's been repeating itself in Cleveland for years. Young quarterback comes in with potential. Front office promises change. Coaching staff talks about building around him. And then, the losses pile up. The mistakes compound. The blame gets placed, and the cycle starts all over again. From what we've seen, Shedeur Sanders walked into a situation that was already fractured. Let's walk through the timeline. When the Browns drafted him, the narrative was clear. This is the guy. This is the future. Finally, a quarterback with the pedigree, the arm talent, the composure to change the culture. Media coverage was optimistic. Fans were cautiously hopeful. The organization made it sound like they were committed to building the right way. But then you look at what actually happened once the season started and the story changes. Early in camp, from what insiders were saying, Shedeur was getting reps. He was learning the system. But the depth chart? That's where things get murky. Reports suggested he wasn't getting first-team reps consistently. Other quarterbacks on the roster were rotating in. And look, that's not unusual for a rookie. But here's what stands out. The offense wasn't being tailored to his strengths. The line wasn't being addressed. The weapons around him, inconsistent at best. Based on the footage we saw in preseason and early games, Shedeur showed flashes. Mobility, arm strength, decision-making under pressure. But the system he was being asked to operate in? It didn't match. The Browns' offense has been built around play action, heavy protection schemes, and timing routes. All of that requires one thing, a functional offensive line, and that's where the breakdown starts. Last season, the Browns' offensive line allowed the 7th most sacks in the NFL. 7th. That's not a small problem. That's a foundational issue. On third downs, the team converted only 35% of attempts, one of the lowest in the league. So you're asking a rookie quarterback to step into a system where protection is inconsistent, where third down conversions are a struggle, and where the margin for error is almost non-existent. Now let's talk about what happens when Shedeur does get on the field. From what we've seen when he's under pressure, his completion rate drops by around 12%. His interception risk doubles, but here's the question nobody's asking. Is that because of him, or is that because the system is already failing before the ball is even snapped? Think about it. You're a young quarterback. You're trying to read a defense, you're trying to go through your progressions. But before you can even get to your second read, the pocket collapses. You're scrambling, you're throwing off your back foot. You're making a decision in a fraction of a second that you shouldn't have to make. And when the throw doesn't connect, the narrative becomes, he can't handle pressure. But is that fair? This isn't excuses. This is context. Two things can be true at once. Shedeur can have things to improve on, and the Browns can be failing to put him in a position to succeed. Both of those things can exist at the same time, but the media, the fans, they don't want nuance, they want answers. They want someone to blame, and right now, that someone is Shedeur Sanders. let's go back to Tony Rizzo's rant for a second, because this is where it all connects. Rizzo didn't just go off about losing, he called out the entire operation. Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Barry, the play calling, the decision-making. He said what a lot of people in that building have probably been thinking but wouldn't say publicly. They don't know what they're doing. That's not a jab at one person. That's an indictment of the entire system. And when you start peeling back the layers, you see exactly what he's talking about. Stefanski is a 2-time Coach of the Year, but he's also got 4 losing seasons. The offensive scheme that won him awards? It's predictable now. Defenses have figured it out, and instead of adapting, the Browns keep running the same plays, making the same mistakes, and expecting different results. Then there's the play calling. From what fans and analysts have pointed out, there are moments in games where the decisions just don't make sense. Taking Shedeur out at critical moments, running wildcat plays when defenses have clearly adjusted, getting too cute with schemes instead of letting the game come to them. And every time that happens, it's not just a wasted play, it's a loss of rhythm. It's a loss of confidence. And for a rookie quarterback trying to find his footing, that's devastating. Here's where the media reaction comes in, and this is important. Early in the season, when Shedeur was first named the starter, coverage was cautiously optimistic. Headlines read things like, "Sanders shows promise," or "Browns finally have their guy." But as the losses started piling up, the tone shifted. Fast. Suddenly, headlines became, "Sanders struggles under pressure," or "Is Sanders the answer?" The focus moved away from the offensive line, allowing 42 quarterback hits in a single month. It moved away from the lack of weapons. It moved away from the coaching inconsistencies. Instead, the spotlight turned entirely on the rookie. And that's how the scapegoat cycle begins. You've seen this before. Baker Mayfield. He came in with energy, with confidence, with potential, and for a brief moment, it looked like he might be the guy. But then the losses came. The criticism mounted, the media turned, and eventually he was out. Was Baker perfect? No. But was he set up to succeed? That's debatable. Now compare that to other rookie quarterbacks in recent years. Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence. What did they have that Shedeur doesn't? Stability. Burrow walked into Cincinnati, and yes, the team was bad initially, but the organization committed to building around him. They invested in the offensive line. They got him weapons. They gave him time to develop. Herbert had a similar situation in Los Angeles. The Chargers built an offense around his strengths. They protected him. They gave him the tools to succeed. Trevor Lawrence? Jacksonville committed to him from day one. They hired the right staff. They drafted the right pieces. And even when things were rocky, they didn't panic. They didn't scapegoat. They stuck to the plan. What's Shedeur got in Cleveland? Inconsistent coaching. A patchwork offensive line. Weapons that are either injured or underperforming, and a front office that, based on the reports, might already be looking for the next solution instead of fixing the current one. That's the difference. That's what Tony Rizzo was getting at when he went off. This isn't about one player. This isn't even about one coach. This is about a franchise that has been dysfunctional for so long that they don't even know how to build the right way anymore. And Shedeur, he's just the latest victim. Now let's talk about the fan reaction, because this is where things get really uncomfortable. Cleveland fans are passionate. They're loyal. They've stuck with this team through decades of heartbreak. But that loyalty comes with pressure. And when losses pile up year after year, that pressure has to go somewhere. Social media amplifies everything. Every throw Shedeur makes gets dissected. Every mistake gets replayed endlessly. Highlight plays are celebrated for a moment, but errors? Those live forever. And the comments? They're brutal. Fans are calling for him to be benched. They're saying he's not the guy. They're comparing him to past failures. But here's the question. Is that fair criticism, or is that misdirected frustration? Because when you look at the stats, when you look at the context, it's hard to argue that Shedeur is the problem. He's not perfect. He's a rookie. He's going to make mistakes. But the system around him is broken. The protection is inconsistent. The play calling is questionable. The leadership is unstable. So when fans are screaming for change, what are they really asking for? Are they asking for a new quarterback, or are they asking for a new system? Let's get into the specifics of what's been happening on the field, because this is where the narrative really falls apart. From the games we've seen, Shedeur has shown toughness. He's taken hits that would make veteran quarterbacks think twice. He stood in the pocket when he knew pressure was coming. He's made throws with defenders in his face. But here's what the stats don't show: the emotional toll, the mental exhaustion. Playing quarterback in the NFL is already one of the hardest jobs in sports. Now add in a hyper-critical fan base, a media circus, and a coaching staff that might not have your back. That's a completely different level of pressure. And Shedeur, he's handling it with more composure than most people would. He's not lashing out. He's not making excuses. He's not throwing anyone under the bus. He's showing up, putting in the work, and trying to get better every week. But is that enough in Cleveland? Based on the history, probably not. Let's talk about accountability, because this is where the entire conversation shifts. Tony Rizzo called it out directly: the front office, the coaching staff, the decision makers at the top. If the Browns are serious about turning things around, the accountability has to start there. Andrew Berry has been the general manager since 2020. In that time, the Browns have a combined record of 27 wins and 53 losses. That's not a small sample size. That's 4 years of underperformance. And yet, from what's being reported, he's expected to keep his job while Kevin Stefanski might get fired. Does that make sense? If the roster construction is flawed, if the draft picks aren't panning out, if free agency moves aren't working, how is that not on the GM? But instead of holding the top accountable, the blame gets pushed down. The coach gets fired, the quarterback gets benched, and the cycle continues. Here's what makes this even more frustrating for fans. The Browns had opportunities to address the offensive line. They had draft capital, they had cap space. But instead of investing in protection for their young quarterback, they made other moves. And now, Shedeur is the one paying the price. From what analysts have pointed out, if the Browns had spent even half the resources on offensive line talent that other successful franchises did, Shedeur's numbers would look completely different. His completion percentage would likely be up by around 7%. His interception rate could drop by 30%. His QB rating under pressure could jump by 15 points. Those aren't small changes. Those are the difference between a struggling rookie and a potential franchise quarterback. But none of that matters if the system doesn't change. And based on everything we've seen, the Browns aren't interested in changing the system. They're interested in changing the scapegoat. Now let's get into the media narratives, because this is where perception starts to override reality. Early in the season, Shedeur was the future. He was the guy who could turn it around. But as the losses piled up, the narrative shifted, and it shifted fast. Suddenly, every incompletion was analyzed. Every sack was his fault. Every interception was proof he wasn't ready. The media stopped talking about the offensive line allowing the most pressures in the league. They stopped talking about the lack of playmakers. They stopped talking about the coaching decisions that put him in impossible situations. Instead, it became about him. And that's how scapegoating works. You take a complex problem with multiple layers and you simplify it down to one person. Because it's easier, it's cleaner, it gives fans someone to blame, but it's not accurate. Here's what we know based on the film. Shedeur has arm talent. He can make every throw. His deep ball is accurate. His timing on short and intermediate routes is solid. He can move in the pocket. He has awareness. Those are the traits you want in a franchise quarterback. But when the protection breaks down, when the play calling doesn't match the situation, when the receivers aren't getting open, none of that matters. And that's the reality Shedeur is facing every single week. Let's talk about the psychological side of this, because it matters more than people think. When you're a rookie quarterback, you're trying to process so much at once. You're learning a new system. You're adjusting to the speed of the NFL. You're building chemistry with receivers. You're reading defenses that are more complex than anything you saw in college. Now add in the external noise, the fans booing, the media questioning, the social media attacks. That pressure doesn't just disappear when you step on the field. It follows you. It affects your confidence. It affects your decision-making. And for Shedeur, that pressure has been relentless. From the moment he was drafted, expectations were sky high. Not just because of his talent, but because of his last name. Because of his father. Because of the legacy he's carrying. That's a weight most rookies don't have to deal with. But instead of acknowledging that, instead of giving him time and support, the Browns organization has put him in a position where every mistake is magnified. Where every loss is his fault. Where the entire future of the franchise is somehow on his shoulders. That's not development. That's destruction. Here's where the timeline really matters, because the sequence of events tells a story. When Shedeur was drafted, the Browns made it sound like they had a plan. They talked about building the offensive line. They talked about getting weapons. They talked about creating a system that would allow a young quarterback to grow. But then the season started, and none of that happened. The offensive line was the same group that struggled the year before. The weapons were inconsistent. The play calling didn't adapt, and Shedeur was thrown into a situation where he had to be perfect just to have a chance. And when he wasn't perfect, the narrative turned. From what we've seen in press conferences, Shedeur hasn't made excuses. He's taken responsibility for his mistakes. He's talked about wanting to get better. He's shown maturity beyond his years. But is that enough to change the perception? Based on the media coverage, probably not. Because once the scapegoat narrative takes hold, it's almost impossible to shake. Every good game is seen as an outlier. Every bad game is seen as proof. And the system that's failing him, that gets ignored. Let's talk about what happens next, because this is where the suspense really builds. The Browns are facing a decision. Do they commit to Shedeur and actually build around him? Do they address the offensive line? Do they fire the coaching staff and bring in people who understand how to develop a young quarterback? Or do they do what they've done for decades? Panic. Make a reactionary move. Bring in someone new and start the cycle all over again. Based on the reports, Kevin Stefanski is likely out. Andrew Berry might stay. And if that happens, it raises a massive question. If the GM who built this flawed roster keeps his job, how does anything actually change? Because firing the coach doesn't fix the offensive line. It doesn't fix the lack of weapons. It doesn't fix the culture of dysfunction that's been brewing in that building for years. And if the system doesn't change, Shedeur is just going to be another name on the list of quarterbacks the Browns failed to develop. Here's what makes this so frustrating for anyone watching. Shedeur has done everything right off the field. He's been professional. He's been coachable. He's been resilient. But none of that matters if the organization isn't willing to do their part. Other teams have shown that when you commit to a young quarterback, when you build the right infrastructure, when you give them time and support, it works. But the Browns, they keep chasing the quick fix. They keep looking for the magic solution. And every time, it ends the same way. Another quarterback blamed, another coach fired, another season wasted, and the fans? They're the ones who suffer the most. Because they've been through this so many times that they don't even know what hope looks like anymore. They see a talented young quarterback, and instead of excitement, they feel dread. Because they've seen this movie before. They know how it ends. Tony Rizzo's rant wasn't just about losing, it was about watching the same mistakes happen over and over again. It was about seeing a franchise that refuses to learn, that refuses to change, that refuses to take accountability. And Shedeur Sanders? He's caught in the middle of it all. Let's be clear about something. This isn't about making Shedeur out to be a victim. This isn't about saying he's perfect. He's not. He's a rookie. He has things to work on. His footwork can be inconsistent. His decision-making under pressure needs refinement. There are throws he should make that he's missing. But here's the thing. Every rookie has flaws. Every young quarterback needs time to develop. The difference is whether the organization gives them that time or not. And based on everything we've seen, the Browns aren't interested in patience. They're interested in results. Right now. And when those results don't come, someone has to pay. The media cycle around this has been exhausting to watch. One week, Shedeur's the future. The next week, he's a bust. One game, he's showing flashes. The next game, he's the reason they lost. There's no consistency. There's no fairness. There's just reactionary hot takes designed to generate clicks. And the fans, they're caught in that cycle too. They want to believe. They want to hope. But every time they do, it gets crushed. So instead, they protect themselves. They criticize. They doubt. They demand change. But what if the change they need isn't at quarterback? What if the change they need is at the top? Here's what we know from watching other franchises. When you get the infrastructure right, when you build a culture of accountability and support, young quarterbacks thrive. But when the infrastructure is broken, when the culture is toxic, even the most talented players struggle. And right now, the Browns' infrastructure is broken. The culture is fractured, and Shedeur is trying to succeed in an environment that's designed for failure. So where does this leave us? That's the question everyone's asking. What happens next? Does Shedeur get another year? Does he get a new coaching staff? Does he get the support he needs to actually develop? Or does the cycle continue? Does he become another name on the list? Another quarterback who wasn't good enough when the reality is the organization failed him? The uncomfortable truth is we don't know. And that's what makes this so hard to watch. Because everything about Shedeur's situation suggests he could be a really good quarterback in the right system. But is Cleveland the right system? Based on the last 2 decades, probably not. And that's what Tony Rizzo was really saying when he dropped that F-bomb. He wasn't just tired of losing, he was tired of watching potential get wasted. He was tired of seeing the same mistakes repeated. He was tired of a franchise that talks about change but never actually changes. Shedeur Sanders didn't ask for this. He didn't ask to be drafted into dysfunction. He didn't ask to carry the weight of a franchise on his shoulders, but that's where he is. And now the question is whether he can survive it. So here's what we're left with. Is the outrage at Shedeur justified, or is it misdirected frustration at a franchise that's been broken for years? Are fans really upset with his performance, or are they upset with watching the same story play out again? And if the Browns actually fix the system tomorrow, if they built the offensive line, if they hired the right coaches, if they created stability, would Shedeur still be criticized? Or would everyone finally see what he could actually be? Those are the questions nobody wants to answer. Because answering them means admitting the problem was never really about the quarterback. It was about everything around him. And that's a much harder problem to fix.